Thank you, Kurt, for joining me today. You gave a talk about the anatomy of a breach at a conference, a data protection conference in 2022, and it was a gripping account worthy of a Le Carre novel. But before we get into that, what do you do now, and what was your career journey to get here?
You know, I was asked my career journey once at an interview, and I kind of started at how I left university, and they hauled me up on it and said, no, we want to know from the cradle what happened to
Oh,
you.
heck.
I didn't think was quite relevant. But I'm head of innovation for the digital agency of the Isle of Man government at the moment, which is my first foray in my 35-year career into being part of the civil service, which is an interesting departure. But I've had a very, very wide and varied journey as a professional IT person. I'm a computer scientist in the old-fashioned sense, from being at university before the internet existed and modern contraptions like that. So I've seen the whole industry build up over time, and I've had a fabulous opportunity over those years to work all across the world in all sorts of guises and scenarios. So I've actually worked in 42 different countries in my career. Okay. For about 65 different companies, one way or another. And I hasten to add, they haven't sacked me. I've moved on to do other things. But it also in various industries, in the finance sector, in manufacturing, in communications. I've been an entrepreneur. I've built my own companies along the way. I've worked in many banks. So been blessed with being able to see things from lots and lots of different perspectives over the course of a career that has been probably one of the most exciting periods in humankind for innovation and moving things forward and advance. As I say, if I tell my children now that I used to use a phone that was attached to the wall by a cable, they look at me as if I'm mad. I do follow that up by saying, well, they still attach it to a cable to charge it, but just it's in a different context. But I mean, that's been my journey, which gives me a lot of perspective about a lot of things and a lot of hands-on experience of having gone through problems and come out the other side, which is kind of the point about the breach, an yes. opportunity that actually people wouldn't want most of the time. But if you've had it, there's a lot of experience that you can draw out of it.
And just as technology's changed a lot over those 35 years, the breaches that can occur have changed quite a lot as well, I imagine. So can you talk me through the experience of a data breach that you share on the conference circuit?
Sure, yes. So in working for a bank, you're always obviously, or should be very aware of the potential for breach. Now, in our particular case, what happened to us was very interesting because it started off with essentially a tip-off. Started off with through legal agencies. It actually coming to us that people were seeing our data, or what they perceived as our data, elsewhere in the world and not under our control. And the second part of that was, and we believe that's still happening. And that was pretty much everything we got, was data of yours is out there in the wild, and you still got a breach. Now imagine what happens when you get that message at 5 o'clock on a Friday night, as to what you do about it. So we went through a whole range of scenarios, and ultimately, to kind of bring it short, we engaged what amounts to military tactics to do this. We engaged ex-military people very, very quickly. We had to think very much on our feet in terms of what we did and what risks we were prepared to take. And when we talked then immediately with legal teams, that it was all about battening down the hatches and switching everything off so that this couldn't get any worse. From a logistical perspective, however, with no information and not knowing how it happened, it was very difficult to see as a technologist how you could then plug that hole, because you didn't know where the hole was.
No, that's the difficult bit to start with.
Absolutely. So we went through a significant legal challenge in the first place, a conversation with our lawyers, where we said, well, we're going to try and manage the risk, but we've got to take that risk to see them come in again, so we can see how they did it. And we had to actually overrule our legal advice in doing that, which is quite an interesting thing to have to do.
Yes.
You've got to be fairly confident that you're going to be able to hold your side of the bargain. So we went through that. We saw the actual event happen live. We saw somebody come into our system and watched them move around. We had locked down various things, so they're kind of bouncing off the walls to some degree. We then expected them to do certain things. We gave them things that they could take away that actually looked like they were interesting but weren't really. They were kind of manufactured things. And then we watched them leave. Now, everything that we had been told led us to believe, because I think it was clearly obvious that they saw something had changed, because they couldn't do the stuff they could before.
Okay. Yeah.
So we were waiting for the ransom demand, the one that said we're going to release information because we knew they'd taken some away previously, and unless you pay this money or pay this Bitcoin or whatever they were going to do. In fact, they didn't. 2 hours later from that event, they published all of our data on the internet. So it was pre-prepared. It was too big to put up there in those 2 hours. And a 25-page manifesto in Spanish that said, we've done this because it's an evil banking regime that exists in the world, and everybody in the world's downtrodden, and we're there to protect them. And even worse, they're offshore. But they went into great detail about how they hacked us. Okay. And obviously that was interesting to us because we could verify some of that. But one interesting immediate lesson was the moment we saw them go, the moment we saw them leave our system, we actually looked at all of our logging information on the systems that we had.
Yeah.
And that whole event that we'd watched happen in real time was invisible. They totally erased all trace of them being there. So any normal system that people would deploy, where they look at these things periodically, none of this would ever show up. No. The only reason we got records of it is we put in a system to deliberately take all that away. Now that's kind of a little bit mind-blowing for you, that you think, well, you always think you have to react quickly, but you don't necessarily think that all traces will be removed from all the systems that you have.
That's it.
So we looked at our systems, we looked at the systems we deployed that were all silent about this attack. So intrusion detection systems, all of these were absolutely state of the art, and none of them told us anything. So what we then discovered was that we'd actually been one of the first people to have a supply chain attack. So actually the systems that we were deploying to protect us normally had administration consoles in the cloud in those big companies that provided those. And systematically, all of those had been hacked to change the parameters of our system so it wouldn't watch what was happening anymore. So we went to some huge providers and some really high-level ones and said, we think you've been hacked. Here's the evidence of that. And none of them could back that up because they'd removed the traces there as well. We also discovered that actually they'd been sitting in our system for the best part of 4 years before they actually did anything. So they'd just been monitoring what was going on, and they played, I'll take it as a compliment because I can't take it as anything else. In their manifesto, they said, and clearly someone knows what they're doing there now because security is getting tighter and we're having to do more to get in. Well, that were the actions that we were taking. What I didn't know, however, is the reason they were able to react to those is they were monitoring all of our communications. So every conversation I had with the supplier out there was being read, so they could see how they had to react to it, because you're not expecting that to happen. And I suppose the last thing in there, before I kind of go on to some of the implications of that, was that what I wanted to do as a person, as I say, very rarely that's at the start of a breach and is still there 2 years later doing the remediation, and normally that wouldn't happen either, is I went back to external parties and said, okay, here's our posture, here's our systems that existed before the breach. So I said, tell me how bad we got that, how badly we were exposed. And unusually from that third party, they said, well, actually, they said in the normal course of operations, you would expect to be protected by the systems you put in. However, the coordination of this event was so sophisticated that you were just outgunned and outmaneuvered. So you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't leave anything open. They were just determined to get into your system. And that led me to a kind of conclusion that there's some thinking, if you like, about saying, make your systems hard to get into. Put the make the firewalls high, make the walls very high. And what that will do is put off people from coming there. They'll go to somewhere that's easier. Now, our experience was kind of the other way around. What we got was some very sophisticated people, state-sponsored, so they didn't care how long things took, who went, well, because these have high walls, there's got to be something interesting behind it. So we're going to persevere. We're going to do exactly the opposite. That has attracted us towards it rather than put us off. And that's, again, slightly bizarre. That's not the normal thinking that you put behind these. Similarly, this to do properly, be transparent and put all the correct remediations in, cost the bank a lot of money. And a vast majority of that wasn't in systems or IT. It was in legal and all of those other things that go around it. Now, if we hadn't have had a parent that could actually fund that, a parent company, then actually the cost of doing that properly would have put us out of business. And therefore you start thinking about, well, actually you could generate an event like this to specifically do that, to put somebody out of business. Just make it happen as almost like a denial of service. And again, this makes you think in very, very different ways from the traditional view. So the kind of upshot of that was really when we went back and put all these systems together, and the sophistication of the systems that are there now is immense. Single points of failure goes into not having trust in one system, for example. So every decision that's made from a security perspective is taken by two systems that have to agree or disagree. So we don't rely upon any one manufacturer in any part of there. So it's quite sophisticated. We distributed data. So we split data up and put it in different places. So if they hacked one thing, they actually hadn't got a full picture of the data. They got a fragment of it. So they couldn't do things like that. Things like encryption is beyond the pale in what they can do. But in policy terms, I went back to my board and said, I cannot guarantee whatever we do that our walls won't be breached. I can just tell you that we've got 6 walls for them to get through, and they're all different. So what that will do is slow them down enough for me to catch them.
Yeah.
And that is the best I can offer you. I don't think it's reasonable anymore to say that you can't be breached. I think it's much more reasonable to expect that you will be, but have a way of seeing that pretty quickly and reacting to it pretty quickly, given the constraints of money and resources that you could put behind this. You could quite literally, for any bank, spend millions upon millions of pounds doing this. And not all banks have that capability, or indeed small organizations, but you can be smart about it. And accepting the fact that you will be breached actually it releases you from a particular problem, and that problem being we have to make this ultimately one thing as strong as possible, one wall to rely on. Castles never did that in old days. They had layers. So we have to do the same thing. It's not just about firewalls, it's about a whole range of activities in there. So we totally turned upside down the whole principle of how we thought about securities and breaches, and thought about containment rather than that ultimate protection from the outside.
Yeah.
But I mean, around that, we had to think about staff issues. Once the staff heard this happened, they felt that organisation was at threat. As a small bank, people felt violated, literally. It was like, you know, someone coming into your home and stealing things.
Yeah.
So we had a whole range of what you could almost call PTSD type symptoms with people. I actually got to the end of the 2 years of remediation before it finally hit me that we'd been in a war for 2 years, because we were always then expecting people to come back and try again or do something of that nature. So it's been a kind of fascinating tour when you look back at it. In the process, a horrible thing to go through, and more so when you felt that you were in a good place to start off with. But as I say, the bad guys really have such sophistication if they want to, if they're time constraints, or they're not trying to make money, as these people didn't. They made no money out of this. They wanted some information that we had potentially on some of our customers, and they got that, and the rest was a smoke screen. But it is really the message we try and get across is that you cannot be complacent in this. You can't expect, well, I've got all of the new toys, I've got all of these sophisticated things, and therefore I'm impervious. Anybody who says that is a fool, because it's not true.
Indeed. And I admire your nerve at sticking it out to see how it was they were getting in, because the tendency would be to just batten down the hatches and pull everything out the wall, but to say we'll lock away some of it so that it's safe, but let's sit and wait for them to come in.
And another lesson learned there is ultimately, when you look at things like disaster recovery policies, or all of and the security policies that go around there is a tendency to think of them as a checklist. So here you go, I've ticked off all of these boxes, and now I'm fine. Now, while sometimes organizations test their business continuity, they'll lock the doors and put everyone outside and say, how do we survive? Testing security is not something that people tend to do, because it requires a sophistication. It almost requires people to hack in to do this. But actually, it isn't formulaic. What we were looking at was a whole range of things that we had to deal with. And what that meant was we had to adapt. So one, you had to have the people who had enough knowledge to kind of deal with this. And that was a combination of internal and external people. And secondly, from my perspective, I had a lot of IT to deal with. So other people in the organization needed to deal with other things, with the PR, with the press, with the finances and all of these. So you actually needed a team that trusted each other and said, okay, that's your responsibility. I don't even want to know about that anymore. You're dealing with that. Come back and tell us when you need something else. So that the strength of the team was immensely important to get all of that through. Even down to, you know, when we kind of let this out in the bank, there were people from the general staff who also were locked away in rooms. They kind of deliver pizzas to you to make sure that you were fed at the right time. But I mean, you see then the kind of colours of people when they're put on the spot, and they can't just follow a book or a set of predefined rules. They have to think on their feet. And actually, those exercises, if you do them, bring that out, and it gets through to people. Well, I hadn't thought that could happen, or it would happen in this way. What would I do there? There is no substitute for being put on that spot, albeit in a trial sense, and working out what your reaction would be to it. Now, we had it live. We had to go through that with all the pain that went with it. But we came out at the other side with a lot of the agencies we were talking with as a kind of model of how to do it. And that wasn't because we planned it or because we'd been given that plan to execute. Is because we had to deal with the problems as they came up in front of us, and we had to make decisions. So that the legal one, really tricky, because that's not what you're, particularly in the bank, you're tuned to do, is ignore your legal advice or override it, to be more precise. But without that, we wouldn't have been in the position that we got to in the end. So there had to be a degree of confidence and accountability to say, well, I'm making that decision, and if it all goes wrong, you can blame me for making that decision, rather than just kind of sit behind the timid approach.
Indeed. So you champion openness and transparency and communication now around data breaches, and it's brilliant that you're able to do this with us. Why did you decide to speak about your experiences, and is that something, an organisational decision, or
it's actually
something
both.
you...
So the bank actually has an ethos about doing things the right way, and what it saw there was, okay, we've been hit, and actually we don't want this to happen to anybody else, or in the same way as it happened to us. So we've got a duty to go out there and share that information. And we certainly took the view that the bad guys share information. If the good guys don't share information, then actually we're on the back foot anyway. So we need to redress that balance. And the other thing I'd have to say is, particularly in a small community, so in the Isle of Man, when it becomes known that that's happened, kind of all of your business peers are either customers or they know about you. And that can go either way. They can go, oh, you're obviously useless, you can't do security properly. Or they can go, oof, actually, you do know how to do this stuff, therefore we want to learn, because, but for the grace of God, that goes I. And that's the way the community banded around us. And so I was contacted by almost all my IT peers across the community saying, let us know if there's anything we can do. But at the end of it, can you come and talk to my board to say what your lessons are and what should be learned? So we were appreciative of the support we got and wanted to give that back. And that also applies to things like the Information Commissioner, the regulators. All of them weren't trying to hit us with a stick. Because we were being open, they were actually helping us. And that was massively advantageous to us in the long term. So that openness through them was absolutely the right thing to do. And if you wanted to put hard-nosed money behind it, it saved us money. It stopped us from doing things that we didn't need to do because they weren't requiring it. So it's an obligation to kind of get that message out there to say, people talk about reputational risk. We've got to keep it secret because there's been a breach. Now, I kind of want to hit that on the head completely. We didn't lose customers as a bank. Because of the state of play now, people kind of sighed and rolled their eyes, metaphorically speaking, and went, oh, not another one that has had a breach. But the primary question was, so what are you doing about it? And we could give them, well, we're doing all of this, and because we're doing that, you want to do the right thing by you, the customer. And they appreciated that. And then we got more customers, because then a whole range of customers went, you've had a breach, so you're going to be paying attention to this. So you're probably more secure than everybody else for a while. So actually, it didn't damage our reputation. The fact that we were open with people actually enhanced our reputation. Because now they believe if something goes wrong, we'll tell them and we'll do something about it, as opposed to just trying to keep it quiet and secret. So I think all of these things are attributes that are necessary in the business community. And as I go back to, if we don't share intelligence information on how to beat the bad guys, then the bad guys win, because they will share that information, and we're outmaneuvered.
Excellent. Thank you. So our project Bijou is all about shifting culture and trying to get people to share experiences. So following that vein of of it's happened here and this is what we did, or this is what we found that works, and that sort of thing. And a lot of it comes down to accountability. So how important do you think accountability is? And is this something we can use to inspire this cultural change?
It's an interesting term, isn't it? Accountability, because it can be used essentially in a carrot mode and a stick mode.
Yeah.
I think that certainly one of the fears is that if you hold your head up and make yourself accountable, that people like regulators and information commissioners will beat you with a stick, which will be fines and all of those type of things. We've not found that to be true. We weren't fined. We were quite specifically, we weren't fined because we were able to demonstrate actions that were protecting our customers now and in the future. We were doing things with them in mind. So the regulators essentially were saying, we'd much rather you spent the money on that than gave us a fine that is kind of immaterial to anyone. I think that from that sense, there shouldn't be people who are afraid of being accountable for that. In a kind of carrot mode, I think in business life more generally, people should be accountable for what they do. That's kind of part of their job, is to do that. And if you're going to run away from accountability, actually you shouldn't be in that job in the first place that has those accountabilities associated with it. Now, I will tell you a kind of interesting part of this. So the day this breach happened, bear in mind that I'm in charge of IT at this point. So I'm accountable and responsible for this. So I offered my resignation on that day. Okay. To the organisation. Their response was, well, don't be so stupid. Who would deal with it if you weren't there? And we're not holding you accountable in that sense. We appreciate the fact that you believe that, but that's an enhancement to make sure you'll go and do things properly from here, because part of it is you'll want to rectify it for your own peace of mind. So I think accountability, we have to be careful how we term it, but taking responsibility for your actions and reacting in a way that meets the kind of cultural requirements, the societal requirements, all of those things, with senior people in senior positions, particularly ones that are holding data, because that's a very precious thing, should be taken very, very seriously. And I don't think people should shy away from those accountabilities and responsibilities.
Yes, I've heard the term bayoneting the wounded around some of this idea of going in hard on those people who have reported something's gone wrong, rather than those that are doing probably definitely the wrong thing by hiding it and not being honest and open. So
absolutely, and particularly in cybersecurity, the resources that sit on the bad side of this are much bigger and much more capable than the resources that are defending. So actually, some of the things that were done in our breach, the community, the protection community, had never seen before. Therefore, as an individual sitting within one bank, how would I know that if the whole security community didn't? Yeah. So in a sense, that audit that I had done was a little bit for my own peace of mind. How big a mistake did I make here? Unfortunately, the answer was none, really. You just were, as I said, outmaneuvered by a kind of bigger party. But that's the point. You should be able to demonstrate you took reasonable measures. And that is true of every part, particularly of regulated businesses, that you should always be able to say, yes, but I did this to mitigate risks. And because the fact that that didn't work isn't always your fault. It's because things have changed in the environment around you. And I think people should, and that's a part of, again, being open. I was with a big organization with a lot of funding to do all of these things and still got caught out. So if someone isn't able to do all of those things, but has demonstrated a will to go to a particular direction, should we bayonet the wounded, as you said, just because there were smarter people out there than they in that particular circumstance?
No, that's it. Sometimes the motivation levels of those trying to get in is just significantly higher than anything we're expecting.
Absolutely.
So to change tack just a little bit, I understand that you've recently written a book about natural intelligence and how you use that to manage AI.
Yeah.
Another hot topic. So it's not like you're sitting back now after your data breach and just seeing it out to the end. You're tackling the next thing. Why did you decide to write about this? And can you share any more details with us at this stage?
I haven't quite finished the book yet.
Okay.
That's still in progress, and it's fitting in amongst everything else. But in terms of AI, if you kind of follow a history through, and this is the advantage you have of going and seeing the internet starting, and then social media, and then the build up to what is AI now, you kind of see that even by its name, it's artificial intelligence. It has to build on natural intelligence. It has to come from somewhere. It's learning from us. And more, what we're doing in society is a greater part is relying upon what the systems tell them, what they see in social media and other things, and now the generative AI. But you have to remember that comes from us in the first place. We generated the original thought that it's using and putting together. So if we stop generating original thought, then actually it's going to run out of material at some point. And there's an ultimate spiral downwards of stupidity, if you like. If we're not putting original things in there, then it's not going to be so intelligent as time moves on. So I think we've got to be cognizant of that. We've got to be cognizant of where does data come from, how is it enhanced. I actually put out on LinkedIn a question which I thought was interesting, because I said, we've got artificial intelligence here. Define intelligence. What is the definition of intelligence? Because we're saying we're creating an artificial version of it, but what's the non-artificial version of intelligence? And actually someone came up with a really interesting view where they said, well, intelligence is being able to form an original question. And you thought, that kind of hits the nail on the head. AI doesn't form the questions, it forms the answers. So if people aren't coming up with the questions and querying these things in the first place, then we have a problem. And it isn't really intelligence in this form. So that's kind of the premise of the book, that if we're not careful, we're going to dumb ourselves down out of existence, not because it's making these weird decisions, but because it's going to get stupider
Yes.
over time. If we don't continue to put original things in the background for it to use. And everything that we've done over the past probably 15 years has been doing exactly that. You look at fake news, you look at social media, the problems we have with self-representation for things like young girls and all of those. It's really us dumbing down the way we think, the way we actually critique things and think things through. And we need to build that back up again, or we do have a problem. So artificial intelligence itself isn't the problem. Our interaction with it is. So if that doesn't sound too boring, that's what the book's about.
No, that's brilliant. That sounds really good, because yes, it is a problem that we're losing the ability to think critically, I think, because we're expecting the computers to do it for us, or that someone will just guide us through. The computer will guide us through something.
Yes.
And yeah, it's going to be a big change after the massive innovation we've gone through in the time you've been in the computer industry. If we then stop having that critical thought at just the time when we're ready to really launch with it. So we'll look forward to seeing that.
Thank you.
And finally then, what advice do you have for organisations to help them prepare and plan in the real world based on the experiences you've had?
Expect the worst and be very pleased when it doesn't happen, I think. But ultimately, in terms of kind of technical architectures, I'd say don't hold to one source of truth here. Do what is called in a kind of a proper sense defense in depth. So you look at multiple things doing that. There's a trick and an art to that, and that's where you can get people to help you. But you know, particularly offshore, I think there's this notion that bizarrely, that because we're offshore, no one's going to come and look at you. But we're offshore and on the internet. That means that it doesn't matter where you are anymore. So you've really got to think that there is that potential for you to be hit. And even looking at that kind of denial of service, if it costs you a lot to do that and you haven't got that money, that puts you out of business. Is that something you want to risk? And there are lots of people who can help. There are lots of organizations. There are lots of, you know, if you look at even tools that cost nothing that are out there now. But we've got lots of advice in all of our places, lots of offices that will help in places like Jersey. You have cert.je, in the Isle of Man you have Oxia. They're all there to try and help you, but you've got to take that step to say, I think I might be vulnerable, what can I do about it? Putting your head in the sand is not really an option anymore.
Well, thank you very much, Kurt, for taking the time to speak with me. Sharing experiences is at the heart of Project Bijou, and your experience is certainly one to remember. I hope that's the last you have to deal with something like that. But we'll speak to you again if you go through something different. So.
Yeah, well, I hope you don't mind if I say I hope that doesn't happen.
Indeed.
In that context, but it's been thank you for having me on this. And I hope that people can take something away from this.
Project Bijou is the ODPA social initiative that aims to change behaviour, shift culture and reduce harms. If this video has piqued your interest, there are many more contributions available on our website at www.odpa.gg/project-bijou.